The $74 billion lie that shook America. Picture this. It's December 2001. You're a regular employee. You've worked at the same company for 15 years. You believed in it. You put your entire retirement savings into company stock because your bosses told you, insisted, it was the safest bet you'd ever make. Then one morning, you wake up, check your account balance, and it's gone. Not down, not dipping. Gone, times $50,000, 100,000. Some people lost their entire life savings, everything they'd worked for, overnight, while the men at the top had already cashed out hundreds of millions of dollars and were sitting pretty in their Houston mansions. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This actually happened. And the company that did it was considered by Fortune magazine the most innovative company in America. 6 years in a row, the company was Enron. And what they pulled off was the most sophisticated, most arrogant, and most destructive corporate fraud in American history. Stay with me, because this story gets so much darker than you think. To understand how Enron collapsed, you have to understand why everyone loved them. Enron started as a pretty boring natural gas pipeline company out of Omaha, Nebraska. Nothing flashy, nothing special. Just pipes in the ground moving gas from one place to another. But then, in 1985, a man named Ken Lay took over. And Ken Lay had a vision. He didn't want to be in the pipeline business. He wanted to be in the trading business. He saw natural gas not as a physical commodity that needed to be moved, but as something you could buy, sell, and bet on, like stocks. So he transformed Enron from a utility company into something nobody had ever really seen before, an energy trading company, a company that would broker deals between buyers and sellers, take a cut, and make money without actually having to produce or move much of anything. And for a while, it worked brilliantly. Then comes 1990. Lay hires a man named Jeffrey Skilling, Harvard MBA, sharp as a blade, arrogant in that specific way where you can't tell if he's brilliant or just completely detached from reality, probably both. Skilling had one idea that would change everything. He wanted to use something called mark-to-market accounting. Here's what that means in plain English. And pay attention here because this is where the fraud actually begins. Normally, a company counts revenue when it actually receives the money. Simple, old school, honest, but mark-to-market lets you count projected future profits as current revenue. The moment you sign a contract, even if it'll take 20 years to play out, you can book all those future earnings right now. Time Skilling convinced the SEC to let Enron use this method, and they said yes, which meant Enron could sign a deal, immediately declare hundreds of millions in profits, and look like the fastest growing company in the country, even if the actual cash hadn't come in yet, even if it never would. That's not innovation. That's a magic trick. Now here's where it gets really sinister. Because Skilling knew the model had a problem. If you keep booking future profits as current revenue, eventually the real numbers catch up to you. You need the actual cash to start flowing or the whole thing falls apart. So Enron created what I can only describe as a shadow empire. Times they set up hundreds, literally hundreds of shell companies, fake partnerships with names like LJM, Cayman, and Raptor. These entities existed on paper. They had offices, letterheads, bank accounts. But their entire purpose was one thing: to hide Enron's debt. Every time Enron made a bad investment or a deal went south, they would transfer those losses to one of these shell companies. Off the books, gone. The loss disappeared from Enron's financial statements, and the executives would get on television and tell investors everything was fine. The man who engineered most of this was Enron's CFO, Andrew Fastow. And here's what makes your stomach turn. Fastow wasn't just hiding the losses. He was personally profiting from the shell companies. He charged Enron management fees to deal with the entities he himself created. Times he made $30 million on the side while his own company's employees were about to lose everything. And the auditors, the people whose entire job was to catch exactly this kind of thing, Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 biggest accounting firms in the world, they signed off on everything, every quarter, every year, because Enron was one of their biggest clients, paying them $52 million a year in fees. You don't bite the hand that feeds you $52 million. The analysts on Wall Street kept giving Enron strong buy ratings. The banks kept lending them money. The press kept writing glowing profiles. Everyone was either complicit, asleep, or too afraid to say the emperor had no clothes. And inside the company, The culture was something else entirely. Skilling instituted what employees called the rank and yank system. Every 6 months, all employees were rated by their peers and managers on a scale of 1 to 5. The bottom 15% were fired, automatically, no exceptions. Think about what that does to a workplace. You don't collaborate, you don't share information, you don't admit weakness, you fight, you backstab, you perform, because your job literally depends on looking better than the person sitting next to you. Skilling called this the smartest guys in the room culture. He genuinely believed that Enron had assembled the finest minds in America and that conventional rules simply didn't apply to people this talented. There was a trader at Enron, 20-something years old, who made $5 million in a single year betting on energy prices. People were flying on private jets to Las Vegas for the weekend on the company's dime. There was a period where traders were driving Ferraris to work. Meanwhile, Skilling was telling the public that Enron stock was undervalued. He was doing TV interviews saying the stock was a no-brainer buy. At the exact same time, he was quietly selling his own shares. He would eventually sell over $60 million in stock before everything collapsed. Ken Lay, he borrowed money against his Enron stock, then repaid the loans with more Enron stock, effectively cashing out hundreds of millions while maintaining the appearance that he was still fully invested. These men knew. They absolutely knew. Crack appeared in the summer of 2001. A financial analyst named Bethany McLean, she was writing a story for Fortune magazine, asked a simple question that nobody in mainstream media had bothered to ask before. How exactly does Enron make its money? Times she called Skilling, he told her she was unethical for even asking. He tried to get her fired through back channels. He sent Enron executives to Fortune's offices to pressure the editors. The article ran anyway. Then in August 2001, something really strange happened. Jeffrey Skilling, at the height of his power, running the most celebrated company in America, abruptly resigned. Said it was for personal reasons. You don't quit the most powerful job in corporate America for personal reasons. People started looking harder, and then there was Sharon Watkins. She was a vice president at Enron, and she wrote an anonymous memo to Ken Lay warning him that the company's accounting was fraudulent and that it was going to implode. She told him, in writing, exactly how the shell companies worked and exactly why the whole structure would eventually collapse. Ken Lay's response? He had his lawyers look into whether he could legally fire her. By October 2001, Enron had to disclose a $618 million quarterly loss, one of the largest in corporate history at the time, and they had to announce that $1.02 billion in shareholder equity had simply vanished. The stock began to freefall, from $90 a share at its peak to under $1, and the whole time this was happening, employees were being told to hold their stock. Don't sell, be loyal, we're going to turn this around. They couldn't sell even if they wanted to. Enron had locked employees out of their 401k accounts during a transition period that conveniently lasted just long enough for the stock to become worthless. In December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. 20,000 people lost their jobs. Many lost their entire retirement savings. The total shareholder value wiped out was $74 billion. Here's what happened to the people responsible. Andrew Fastow, the CFO who built the Shadow Empire, pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy. He served 6 years in federal prison and gave back $23 million. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted on 19 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading. He was sentenced to 24 years, later reduced to 14. He walked out of prison in 2019. Ken Lay was convicted on all counts against him, but he died of a heart attack in July 2006 before he could be sentenced. Under federal law, his conviction was vacated. His family kept the money. Let that sink in for a second. The man at the top of the entire scheme, the man who presided over the looting of billions of dollars from ordinary people, died before facing a single day in prison. And legally, it's as if he was never even convicted. Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm that looked the other way for years, they were indicted and essentially ceased to exist. 85,000 employees worldwide lost their jobs. That conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court on a technicality. But the firm was already gone. The banks that financed the fraud paid fines, moved on. Here's what I want you to sit with. Enron didn't collapse because of one bad actor. It collapsed because of a system where accountants looked the other way for fees, where Wall Street analysts gave buy ratings on companies they privately called disasters, where journalists were intimidated into silence, where regulators were underfunded and outmaneuvered. Every single institution that was supposed to catch this failed, or chose not to look, and 20,000 ordinary people paid the price. The really uncomfortable truth is this: the conditions that made Enron possible didn't disappear when Enron did. 7 years after Enron, the entire global financial system nearly collapsed in 2008 under the weight of another fraud hiding in plain sight, just in a different office building with different acronyms and different men in expensive suits. The names change,